Pekka-Eric Auvinen was born on a summer day, June 4, 1989, in the small town of Jokela, Finland, a community marked by its serene landscapes and tight-knit populace. Life in Jokela was far removed from the fast-paced urban centers, defined instead by quiet streets, modest homes, and an atmosphere where children played outside freely and neighbors often knew one another by name. His family was an ordinary middle-class household. His father worked in information technology, a career that reflected Finland's growing tech industry, while his mother dedicated herself to healthcare, contributing to the well-regarded Finnish social system. From the outside, the young Pekka's upbringing appeared stable and supportive. He was an only child, growing up with no reported signs of abuse or neglect. Yet beneath this placid exterior, the early seeds of isolation were sown. As a child, Pekka was notably introverted. Unlike many of his peers who sought social engagement and play, he preferred solitude. Teachers described him as quiet and polite but distant, a boy who rarely initiated conversation or activities with classmates. His academic performance was average at best, marked more by compliance than enthusiasm. The local school system, known for its strong emphasis on equality and social development, seemed to provide a routine environment. Yet even within this framework, Pekka found himself increasingly marginalized. His reserved nature and unique interests made him a target for social alienation. By the time he reached adolescence, this marginalization took on a more troubling form. Pekka became a victim of bullying, a common yet deeply damaging experience for many young people worldwide. The bullying he endured was not just isolated incidents but a pattern of behavior that affected his daily life at school. Reports indicate verbal taunts, name-calling, social exclusion, and at times physical intimidation. The exact nature and scale of this bullying are difficult to fully reconstruct, as victims and perpetrators often remember events differently, but there was no doubt that Pekka experienced a profound sense of rejection. The cruelty of his peers deepened his withdrawal. Rather than seeking help or forming supportive friendships, he internalized his pain, his worldview darkening as he felt increasingly alienated from those around him. This social exclusion was compounded by a growing academic disengagement. Once a student who followed the school curriculum without major issues, Pekka's motivation eroded. He began skipping classes regularly, often wandering school corridors aimlessly or remaining isolated in corners away from his classmates. Teachers observed this behavioral decline with concern but were largely unaware of the depth of his emotional turmoil. He was not disruptive or confrontational, but instead seemed lost in a bleak internal world that none around him could easily access or understand. As his real-world social connections diminished, Pekka increasingly sought refuge in the virtual world. The internet, vast and anonymous, became his primary outlet and sanctuary. It was in this digital realm that Pekka found like-minded communities and content that spoke to his growing disillusionment and rage. Online, he explored a spectrum of extremist ideologies, including violent and nihilistic philosophies that rejected societal norms and human values. Among the most influential materials Pekka encountered were documents and footage relating to school shootings, particularly the 1999 Columbine massacre in the United States. Columbine had become a grim touchstone for many disaffected youth worldwide, an event shrouded in infamy that seemed to validate the rage and despair of some troubled young minds. Pekka absorbed this material obsessively. He watched countless hours of video footage, read personal diaries, studied the manifestos of Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, the two Columbine shooters. He replicated their language and symbolism in his own online postings. Using the pseudonym Sturmgeist89, Pekka cultivated an online persona that conveyed menace and detachment. His videos showed him dressed entirely in black trench coats and dark sunglasses, firing weapons at targets, his expression emotionless and cold. These videos were more than just performances. They were declarations of a nihilistic philosophy that saw the world as corrupt and doomed. Pekka wrote extensively online, articulating a worldview steeped in misanthropy and natural selection. He portrayed humanity as a herd of mindless robots, or sheep, blindly following orders and perpetuating societal decay. Within this worldview, Pekka cast himself as a natural selector, a figure tasked with cleansing the world by eliminating its weak and corrupt elements through violence. This radicalization process was gradual but relentless. Pekka's isolation, combined with the echo chamber of violent internet communities, created a feedback loop that intensified his feelings of hatred and despair. He developed a fixation on death and destruction, framing his own life as a prelude to a violent act of retribution against a society that had rejected and broken him. The internet, with its blend of anonymity and global reach, enabled him to externalize his darkest thoughts and find a disturbing form of validation. Throughout 2007, Pekka began concrete preparations for the violent act he envisioned. Finnish firearm laws required that applicants for handguns pass a training course and psychological evaluation. Pekka underwent this process and was legally granted a license for a .22 caliber Walther P22 pistol. This legal acquisition later became a significant point of debate, as many questioned how a deeply troubled teenager could pass psychological screenings designed to prevent such outcomes. Pekka's online activity in the weeks before November 7, 2007, grew increasingly explicit. He uploaded a chilling video titled, Jokela High School Massacre, November 7, 2007, in which he appeared in his trademark all-black outfit and sunglasses, holding his pistol and staring expressionlessly at the camera. The video was a clear declaration of intent, with Pekka referring to the forthcoming attack as Operation Zero Hour, framing it as a decisive moment to cleanse society. Despite the ominous nature of his online postings, authorities were caught off guard. Reports of Pekka's videos and disturbing statements reached police only hours before the attack, leaving little time for intervention. The legal and procedural systems were not prepared to respond swiftly enough to prevent the massacre. On the morning of November 7, 2007, Pekka-Eric Auvinen arrived at Jokela High School. The school was a modest institution serving around 450 students, located in a suburban setting away from Finland's major cities. It was a place known for its calm environment and focus on education rather than security concerns. Pekka's appearance was striking and deliberate. Wearing black combat boots, a long black trench coat and dark sunglasses, he projected an image that combined menace with theatrical intent. At 11:44 a.m., he drew his pistol and opened fire in the main hallway of the school. The sudden outbreak of violence shattered the routine calm of the school day. Screams echoed as students and teachers scrambled for safety. Some immediately locked themselves in classrooms, moving furniture to barricade doors and huddling silently in the darkness. Others fled down corridors or jumped from windows to escape the gunfire. Chaos engulfed the building as panic spread rapidly. Pekka moved methodically, shooting those he encountered with cold precision. Over several harrowing minutes, he killed 8 people. 5 male students aged between 16 and 18, 2 female staff members, and the school principal who had reportedly tried to intervene and stop the shooter. The victims suffered multiple gunshot wounds, with many struck at close range in the head and chest, indicating a deliberate and lethal intent. Several others were wounded either by gunfire or in the frantic efforts to flee. Emergency services were called immediately, and police arrived on scene while the shooting was ongoing. Officers entered the building and found Pekka barricaded in a room on the second floor. A tense standoff followed, lasting roughly 20 minutes. During this period, Pekka shot himself in the head, ending his own life at approximately 12:04 p.m. He was found alive but critically wounded and transported to Tulo Hospital in Helsinki. Despite intensive care, he died later that evening at around 10:15 p.m. The impact of the Jokela school shooting reverberated throughout Finland. A country priding itself on safety, social equality, and trust in its institutions was confronted with an act of brutal violence that seemed unimaginable. National leaders, including President Tarja Halonen and Prime Minister Matti Vanhanen, addressed the nation with messages of condolence and calls for unity and healing. The government declared a national day of mourning, and vigils were held across Finland, where citizens lit candles and gathered to remember the 8 victims and 2 staff members who had lost their lives. Survivors, families, and the wider community faced long-term trauma and grief that would continue to affect them for years to come. The aftermath saw intense investigation into Pekka's background and motives. Authorities uncovered a vast digital archive, thousands of images, videos, writings, and manifestos, documenting his descent into violent extremism and misanthropy. His online writings painted a dark portrait of a young man consumed by hatred and a belief in his own righteousness as a natural selector. The tragedy ignited nationwide debate over Finland's gun control laws, the adequacy of mental health screenings, and the social systems meant to identify and help at-risk youth. Law enforcement and mental health officials faced scrutiny for their inability to act on warning signs. In response, Finland enacted significant reforms. Gun laws were tightened with stricter psychological evaluations and greater restrictions on firearm ownership by young people. Schools across the country implemented enhanced security measures and emergency preparedness plans. The government increased collaboration with internet providers and platforms to detect and remove violent or extremist content more rapidly. The tragedy spurred a broad societal conversation about bullying, mental health, social isolation, and the internet's role in radicalization. Despite these efforts, the nation was shaken again less than a year later by the Kauhajoki school shooting, perpetrated by a young man who explicitly cited Pekka-Eric Auvinen as an influence. Today, the Jokela school shooting remains a deeply painful chapter in Finland's history, a stark reminder of the consequences when mental health needs go unmet, social isolation intensifies, extremist ideology finds fertile ground, and firearms are accessible to troubled youth. Pekka-Eric Auvinen's story is not one to glorify but to learn from. A cautionary tale about the complex interplay of factors that can lead to tragedy. Survivors, families, educators, and advocates continue to call for compassion, vigilance, and early intervention to prevent similar acts of violence. The event exposed harsh truths about the fragility of peace and the urgent necessity to nurture mental and social well-being in a world where digital connectivity can sometimes amplify alienation and despair. Pekka-Eric Auvinen's early years were marked by an environment that, on the surface, offered normalcy and stability. Jokela, his hometown, was a community typical of Finland's suburban areas, quiet, orderly, and surrounded by the natural beauty of forests and lakes. Children played freely outdoors and families generally felt safe within their neighborhoods. His parents, professionals in their respective fields, provided a comfortable upbringing. His father, an IT specialist, was part of Finland's burgeoning technology sector, a country often hailed as a global leader in education and innovation. His mother's work in healthcare reflected Finland's commitment to social welfare. This family setting was neither affluent nor impoverished but firmly middle class, with an emphasis on education and social responsibility. Despite the outward normalcy, subtle tensions and undercurrents can exist in any household, often invisible to outsiders. Pekka's personality from an early age was quiet and introspective. Unlike many children who thrive on social interaction and group activities, Pekka showed an early preference for solitary play and introspection. Teachers recalled a child who was polite but emotionally distant. He rarely initiated friendships or joined peer groups and was content with his own company. This tendency was not immediately cause for concern. Many children are naturally reserved and may simply take longer to develop social skills. However, as Pekka moved into primary school, his withdrawal became more pronounced. School environments can be a complex microcosm of social hierarchies, power dynamics, and peer pressures. For a boy like Pekka who was shy and different, these pressures could feel overwhelming. As he progressed through school, Pekka increasingly became isolated from his peers. The Finnish education system prides itself on equality and fostering inclusive environments, but even the best systems cannot always prevent bullying. Pekka became a target for classmates who perceived him as an easy victim, someone quiet, unlikely to retaliate, and markedly different. The bullying was multifaceted. It involved verbal abuse, taunts about his appearance, mannerisms, and demeanor, as well as social exclusion from group activities, lunches, and conversations. In some cases, reports indicate physical intimidation, though less frequently documented. The psychological toll of bullying is profound. For Pekka, this sustained mistreatment exacerbated feelings of loneliness and worthlessness. His internal world darkened and the sense of being an outsider deepened. Unlike many victims of bullying who find solace in friendships, family, or supportive adults, Pekka seemed to retreat further into isolation. His academic performance began to slip as concentration waned and motivation disappeared. Teachers noted his increasing disengagement but struggled to understand the full extent of his struggles, as he did not exhibit outward signs of distress or behavioral problems typical of students in crisis. At home, Pekka's reserved nature continued. Family members described him as quiet and polite but increasingly withdrawn. Conversations with parents were reportedly minimal, with Pekka showing little inclination to share his feelings or experiences. The emotional distance within the household meant that warning signs went unnoticed or unaddressed. His parents later expressed regret and sorrow at not recognizing the depth of their son's suffering and alienation. They described him as a boy who, despite seeming normal on the surface, was silently battling demons they could not see. As his social world contracted, Pekka turned to the internet, which would become a pivotal part of his life. The early 2000s marked a period of rapid growth in digital connectivity and online communities. For isolated youths like Pekka, the internet offered anonymity and access to a vast array of information and like-minded individuals. Pekka immersed himself in this world, exploring forums, chat rooms, and websites that catered to disaffected young people and extremist ideologies. The digital world provided a sense of belonging that he lacked in the real world, but it also exposed him to dangerous and radicalizing influences. Among the many topics Pekka explored, the phenomenon of school shootings fascinated and obsessed him. The Columbine massacre in particular was a constant reference point. He watched videos of the attack, read detailed accounts, and studied the personal writings of the perpetrators. This macabre fascination was more than curiosity. It was a blueprint and a source of inspiration. Pekka began to adopt the language, style, and symbolism of Columbine shooters Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. His online persona, Sturmgeist89, featured videos of himself dressed in black, holding weapons, and delivering statements that expressed nihilism, contempt for society, and a desire for violent retribution. The internet's role in Pekka's radicalization is a complex and troubling aspect of his story. On one hand, it provided him with an outlet to express his dark thoughts and connect with others who shared similar views. On the other hand, it served as an echo chamber that amplified his hatred and despair. The anonymity and lack of accountability online allowed Pekka to descend deeper into extremist ideology without intervention. His postings became increasingly graphic and explicit, culminating in videos that foreshadowed his planned attack. Pekka's psychological profile at this time was marked by profound alienation, depression, and a fixation on violence as a means of asserting control and delivering justice, albeit a warped and destructive form of justice. He viewed the world through a lens of cynicism and misanthropy, believing that humanity was weak, corrupt, and deserving of punishment. His writings and videos reveal a young man consumed by hopelessness, yet determined to make a brutal statement through violence. The months leading up to November 7, 2007, were characterized by meticulous planning. Pekka legally obtained a .22 caliber Walther P22 pistol after fulfilling Finland's firearm licensing requirements, which included safety training and psychological evaluation. This legal access to a weapon, despite his evident mental health struggles, sparked intense debate post-tragedy regarding the adequacy of Finland's gun laws and screening processes. Pekka's final videos, uploaded just days before the attack, served as chilling declarations of intent. In the video titled, Jokela High School Massacre, November 7, 2007, he appeared stoic, dressed in his signature black trench coat and sunglasses, holding his weapon and delivering a cold, calculated statement about his plans to enact Operation Zero Hour. Authorities received reports about these videos only a few hours before the attack, but the short time frame made intervention impossible. On November 7th, Pekka arrived at Jokela High School, dressed entirely in black, blending menace with theatricality. At 11:44 a.m. he drew his pistol and began shooting in the school's main corridor, unleashing chaos and terror. The ensuing minutes were marked by panic and heroism. Students scrambled to safety, some barricading classrooms, others fleeing through windows. The school principal and staff confronted the shooter, many attempting to protect students and de-escalate the situation despite the danger. 8 people lost their lives, including 5 teenage students, 2 female staff members and the principal. Several others were wounded. Police arrived swiftly and found Pekka barricaded in a room. After a tense standoff, Pekka took his own life. He was rushed to hospital but died later that evening. The nation was plunged into mourning. Finland's leaders, citizens, and survivors grappled with the enormity of the tragedy. Vigils and memorials took place nationwide. The shooting ignited debates over gun control, mental health services, bullying, and the power of online radicalization. Investigations revealed a detailed digital footprint documenting Pekka's descent into violent extremism and the missed opportunities for intervention. Reforms followed, including stricter gun laws, improved mental health screening, enhanced school security, and internet monitoring. Yet the shadow of Jokela lingered. The tragedy remained a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities in society and the urgent need to support and understand at-risk youth. November 7, 2007, dawned like many other autumn days in southern Finland: crisp air, pale sunlight filtering through overcast skies, and the faint scent of drying leaves in the suburbs surrounding Jokela. For the students and staff of Jokela High School, the day began with the usual hum of normalcy. Classrooms filled with chatter, the clatter of books and backpacks, and the steady rhythm of lesson schedules. No one could have predicted that this ordinary morning would be forever etched in tragedy and sorrow. Jokela High School was a modest institution. It housed roughly 450 students aged between 16 and 19 years old, with approximately 30 teachers and administrative staff. The building itself was functional rather than grand, featuring a main hallway that connected classrooms, administrative offices, and common areas. Security measures were minimal, as the school had never experienced violence or threats serious enough to warrant extensive precautions. This trusting environment was emblematic of Finnish schools at the time, a place meant for learning and community, not fear. Pekka-Eric Auvinen arrived on that morning dressed in his characteristic all-black ensemble. A long trench coat that brushed near his knees, heavy black combat boots, dark sunglasses shielding his eyes, and his signature black gloves. His attire was deliberately chosen, a calculated projection of the grim and threatening persona he had constructed online. This was no casual outfit. It was a uniform, a costume for the grim act he intended to commit. He carried with him a .22 caliber Walther P22 handgun, legally obtained through Finland's gun licensing process. Witnesses would later recall that Pekka's presence exuded an eerie stillness, an unsettling calm amid the usual morning bustle. As he moved through the school's entrance and into the main hallway, the ordinary sounds of footsteps, lockers slamming, and distant conversations went unnoticed against the shadow of impending horror. At approximately 11:44 a.m., Pekka stopped in the hallway and drew his firearm. In an instant, the peaceful school environment was shattered by the sharp cracks of gunfire. His shots rang out with deadly precision, echoing off the sterile walls and sending students and staff into panic. The first victims were caught off guard, unable to react before being struck. Students screamed, ducked behind lockers, or scrambled toward the nearest classrooms. Teachers hurriedly attempted to shield their pupils, shouting instructions to stay quiet and barricade doors. Pekka's movement through the hallway was deliberate and methodical. His intent was clear: maximum harm within minimum time. Several students suffered fatal wounds at close range. Others were injured as they tried to flee. Among those struck down was the school principal, a man known to many students for his dedication and approachability. Reports suggest that he confronted Pekka in a desperate bid to stop the shooting, an act of bravery that tragically cost him his life. The atmosphere inside Jokela High School quickly deteriorated from confusion to sheer terror. Students locked themselves inside classrooms, pushing heavy desks against doors, turning off lights, and lying silently on the floors in hopes of escaping notice. The sound of sirens approached in the distance, bringing a mixture of hope and dread. Others, overwhelmed by panic, chose to run, some rushing blindly down corridors, others jumping from windows to the school grounds below. Amid the chaos, the bravery and quick thinking of teachers and students stood out. Several teachers organized students in hiding places, offering calm words and guidance to terrified youths. One teacher reportedly maintained contact with emergency responders via phone, providing critical information about the shooter's location and the status of students. These acts of courage amidst unimaginable fear became the foundation of survivor stories that would later emerge. Emergency calls flooded into local police and medical dispatch centers almost immediately. Officers and paramedics mobilized quickly, racing through suburban roads toward Jokela High School. However, by the time police arrived, Pekka had barricaded himself inside a room on the second floor, initiating a tense standoff. The police faced the delicate challenge of securing the safety of hostages and victims while negotiating with a heavily armed and desperate assailant. The standoff lasted approximately 20 minutes. Negotiators attempted to communicate with Pekka, though his responses were reportedly minimal and emotionless. During this time, the wounded remained trapped inside the school, and medical teams prepared to enter as soon as it was safe. Eventually, at roughly 12:04 p.m., Pekka ended the siege by shooting himself in the head. First responders found him critically injured but alive. He was rushed by ambulance to Tulo Hospital in Helsinki, but despite intensive treatment he died that evening at about 10:15 p.m. The aftermath of the shooting was devastating. 8 people had been killed, including 5 male students between 16 and 18 years old, 2 female staff members and the principal. Several others sustained injuries, some life-threatening, others less severe but no less traumatic. The local community was thrown into mourning and shock, struggling to comprehend the horror that had unfolded in what had been a safe and familiar place. Families of victims and survivors faced unimaginable grief and trauma. The physical and psychological wounds would echo for years. Support networks quickly formed, counseling services were offered to students and staff, and memorials were established in honor of those lost. Across Finland, the tragedy sparked a national conversation about youth violence, mental health, gun control, and the influences of online extremism. Police and investigative agencies launched a thorough inquiry into the events leading up to the shooting. They pieced together Pekka's digital footprint, uncovering a disturbing array of videos, writings, and manifestos detailing his ideological motivations and plans. The question of how such a young person with evident mental health struggles obtained a firearm led to scrutiny of Finland's gun licensing and mental health evaluation processes. Throughout the country, schools reassessed security protocols. Emergency response training was enhanced, and communication systems updated to better coordinate in crises. The government implemented reforms aimed at preventing similar tragedies, including tighter restrictions on firearm access and expanded mental health services for youth. The media coverage was intense and often respectful, seeking to balance public interest with sensitivity toward victims and their families. Despite these efforts, the Jokela school shooting remained a painful reminder of the challenges society faces in identifying and supporting vulnerable youth, controlling firearm access, and addressing the complex factors that can lead to mass violence. Less than a year later, the Kauhajoki school shooting would shock the nation again, perpetrated by a young man who cited Pekka-Eric Auvinen as an inspiration. This dark chapter in Finland's history underscores the importance of vigilance, compassion, and proactive intervention to prevent the isolation, despair, and radicalization that can culminate in such tragedies. The legacy of Jokela is not only in mourning lost lives but also in ongoing efforts to build safer, more supportive communities where no young person feels so alone or hopeless. The Jokela school shooting left behind a community shattered by grief and struggling to comprehend the enormity of its loss. The 8 lives taken, as well as those wounded and traumatized, were not mere statistics but individuals with dreams, relationships, and stories, each leaving a void in the hearts of family, friends, and the entire community. Understanding their humanity provides a crucial perspective on the tragedy's true impact. Among the victims were 5 male students, aged between 16 and 18, each at the cusp of adulthood, with futures full of promise before their lives were brutally cut short. These young men were classmates, friends, and brothers, each carrying hopes for careers, families, and lives shaped by their unique personalities and aspirations. Teachers remembered them as bright and engaging youths, some excelling academically, others passionate about sports or the arts. Their sudden deaths devastated families and peers alike, igniting a communal sorrow that echoed far beyond Jokela. 2 female staff members were also among the fallen, dedicated educators and caretakers whose roles extended beyond teaching to mentoring and nurturing the next generation. Their commitment to the school and its students was evident in the affectionate remembrances shared by colleagues and pupils. Their deaths underscored the vulnerability of those who serve communities in nurturing roles, often putting others' safety before their own. Perhaps most tragically, the school principal lost his life attempting to confront the shooter and protect his students. Known for his calm demeanor and firm leadership, he was respected by both staff and students. Eyewitness accounts painted a picture of a man who acted selflessly in the face of danger, embodying the highest ideals of responsibility and courage. His sacrifice became a symbol of resilience and dedication in the darkest moments. Survivors of the shooting faced profound physical and psychological challenges. Some bore injuries that required extensive medical treatment, surgeries, and long-term rehabilitation. Yet even those who escaped physical harm were not untouched by trauma. The memories of that day, the screams, the gunfire, the loss of friends and mentors, etched deep scars on their minds. Many struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression, navigating complex pathways toward healing in the months and years that followed. Families of victims were engulfed in grief so profound it defies simple description. Parents, siblings, and extended relatives found themselves confronting unbearable loss, struggling to reconcile the normalcy of their loved ones' lives with the sudden, violent rupture of death. Public support poured in from across Finland and beyond. Flowers, candles, heartfelt letters, and visits to memorial sites. Community organizations and mental health services mobilized to provide counseling and support groups, recognizing that healing would require both time and compassionate care. The local community of Tuusula, as well as the broader Finnish society, rallied in an extraordinary outpouring of solidarity. Vigils were held in school halls, town squares, and churches, places of collective mourning where tears were shed and stories shared. These gatherings became spaces where grief was acknowledged, and the resolve to remember and honor the victims took root. Schools across the country held moments of silence, and national leaders offered public condolences, framing the tragedy as a shared wound requiring unity and empathy. In the wake of the shooting, many survivors and families became advocates for change. They spoke publicly about the importance of addressing bullying, improving mental health services for youth, and tightening gun control laws. Their voices contributed to national dialogues about prevention, support, and the complex social dynamics that could lead to such violence. Some survivors shared their stories in interviews, helping to humanize the tragedy and raise awareness about the ongoing needs of those affected. Mental health professionals emphasized the importance of early intervention, community engagement, and destigmatization of psychological struggles among young people. Schools implemented programs focused on social inclusion, anti-bullying initiatives, and peer support networks. The tragedy catalyzed greater investment in mental health resources, with efforts to make counseling and psychiatric care more accessible and less stigmatized across Finland. The government's response was multifaceted, reflecting the need to address immediate safety concerns and broader societal factors. Gun laws were tightened with new restrictions on firearm licensing for minors and more rigorous psychological evaluations. Police and emergency services reviewed and improved their protocols for active shooter situations, incorporating lessons learned from Jokela and similar tragedies worldwide. Internet monitoring efforts were enhanced to identify and counteract the spread of violent extremist content that had played a role in Pekka-Eric Auvinen's radicalization. Despite these measures, the community's healing was neither simple nor swift. Trauma has long shadows, and many survivors and families continued to grapple with pain and loss years after the shooting. Commemorations, support groups, and counseling services remained vital components of recovery. Educational initiatives sought to keep the memory of the victims alive while promoting resilience and empathy among students. The legacy of the Jokela school shooting endures as a solemn reminder of the fragility of life and the critical importance of compassion, vigilance, and proactive care in preventing violence. The victims' and survivors' stories underscore the human cost behind headlines and statistics, urging society to confront uncomfortable truths and work collectively towards safer, more supportive communities. The tragic events of the Jokela school shooting cast a harsh light on the complex and multifaceted nature of youth mental health, social alienation, and the mechanisms by which vulnerable individuals can spiral into violence. At the heart of this discussion was the psychological profile of Pekka-Eric Auvinen, whose descent into extremism and destructive behavior highlighted both personal struggles and systemic gaps in mental health care. From available information, it is clear that Pekka exhibited numerous signs of psychological distress well before the shooting. His withdrawal from social interaction, declining academic performance, and preoccupation with nihilistic and violent ideologies are consistent with symptoms observed in certain mental health conditions such as depression, social anxiety, and possibly emerging personality disorders. However, no public records indicate that Pekka was ever formally diagnosed or treated for mental illness prior to the tragedy. This absence of clinical intervention raised urgent questions about detection, diagnosis, and support for at-risk youth in Finland. The Finnish mental health system, lauded for its comprehensive and accessible care, faces challenges common to many countries in identifying adolescents who quietly struggle beneath the surface. Adolescents often mask their suffering, and social withdrawal can be mistaken for shyness or normal teenage moodiness. The stigma surrounding mental health issues can prevent young people from seeking help or discussing their feelings openly, further complicating early intervention efforts. Pekka's case underscores the difficulty of distinguishing between typical adolescent behavior and warning signs of deeper psychological crisis. His online activity, characterized by the consumption and production of violent, nihilistic content, was a key indicator of his troubled state. Yet, the anonymity and privacy of the internet creates significant obstacles for caregivers and authorities to monitor and assess potential risks effectively. Experts emphasize that mental health assessments must consider a wide range of factors, including behavioral changes, social relationships, family dynamics, and online behavior patterns. In Pekka's case, despite clear red flags present in his digital footprint, the rapid progression from radicalization to violent action left little opportunity for timely intervention. The legal framework governing firearm licensing, which permitted him to acquire a handgun after passing psychological evaluations, was scrutinized. Critics argued that the assessments did not adequately capture his psychological state or potential for violence. Following the Jokela tragedy, Finland undertook significant reforms aimed at improving youth mental health services and prevention strategies. Schools increased their capacity to identify students exhibiting signs of distress through enhanced training for teachers and counselors. Collaborative networks were established among schools, mental health professionals, social services, and law enforcement to share information and coordinate responses more effectively. Public awareness campaigns sought to destigmatize mental health issues and encourage young people and their families to seek help without fear or shame. Programs focusing on bullying prevention gained renewed emphasis, recognizing the profound impact of peer victimization on psychological well-being. Creating inclusive, supportive school environments was identified as essential for fostering resilience and reducing social isolation. Peer support groups and mentorship initiatives were introduced to connect vulnerable youth with positive role models and communities. The digital dimension of mental health and radicalization also received increased attention. Policymakers and technology companies collaborated to develop tools for detecting and removing extremist content online, balancing concerns about privacy and free expression with the imperative to protect vulnerable individuals and society at large. Educational efforts aimed at promoting digital literacy and critical thinking among youth sought to inoculate them against harmful online influences. Psychologists and sociologists analyzing the Jokela case highlighted the importance of a holistic approach to youth mental health, one that integrates emotional, social, educational, and technological factors. Early identification and intervention, combined with accessible treatment options and supportive environments, are key to preventing the progression from alienation to violence. The legacy of Pekka-Eric Auvinen's psychological journey remains a powerful lesson. It illustrates not only individual suffering but systemic challenges in addressing the needs of troubled youth in a rapidly changing social and technological landscape. Finland's response, while marked by significant reforms, continues to evolve as new insights emerge about mental health, radicalization, and violence prevention. Understanding the intersection of mental health and mass violence requires ongoing commitment from educators, healthcare providers, policymakers, families, and communities. The Jokela school shooting serves as a somber catalyst for this work, reminding society that behind every tragedy lies a complex human story demanding compassion, vigilance, and action to protect future generations. When the first frantic emergency calls reached police dispatchers on the morning of November 7, 2007, the response units mobilized rapidly, aware that every second could mean the difference between life and death. Jokela High School, located in the suburban town of Tuusula, was not equipped for an event of such violence, and the police officers arriving at the scene faced a chaotic and dangerous environment. Initial eyewitness reports described a gunman moving through school corridors, firing indiscriminately, with students and staff desperately seeking cover. Finnish police forces, trained primarily for conventional law enforcement rather than mass casualty incidents, quickly adapted to the unprecedented situation. Upon arrival, officers secured the perimeter and attempted to establish communication with the shooter, who had barricaded himself inside a second-floor room. The tactical approach aimed to minimize casualties while negotiating a peaceful resolution. However, the psychological state of Pekka-Eric Auvinen, combined with his determination to inflict harm, made negotiations challenging and ultimately futile. The standoff lasted roughly 20 minutes, during which time emergency medical teams staged nearby, preparing to enter the building once the threat was neutralized. The police utilized negotiation tactics, attempting to de-escalate the situation, but Pekka's silence and eventual act of shooting himself ended the siege abruptly. First responders found him critically wounded, and he was transported to Tulo Hospital, where he later died. Following the incident, law enforcement agencies launched a comprehensive investigation to reconstruct the timeline, motives, and circumstances that led to the shooting. Crime scene units meticulously processed the school, collecting physical evidence such as shell casings, ballistic trajectories, and forensic data to understand the shooter's movements and actions. Interviews with survivors, staff, and witnesses provided crucial insights into the sequence of events and the experiences of those involved. Digital forensics became a critical component of the investigation. Authorities seized Pekka's computer, storage devices, and online accounts, uncovering a vast archive of videos, writings, and communications that revealed his ideology, plans, and state of mind. This evidence was pivotal in understanding the extent of his radicalization and served as a basis for recommendations on preventing similar occurrences. The investigation also scrutinized the processes that allowed Pekka to legally obtain a firearm. Finland's gun licensing system required applicants to pass safety courses and psychological evaluations. However, the review revealed gaps in evaluating mental health risks, particularly regarding the ability to identify signs of severe distress or violent tendencies masked by outward compliance. This finding triggered debates about strengthening psychological screening and integrating social and behavioral information into licensing decisions. In the wake of Jokela, Finnish police and emergency services reviewed and upgraded their protocols for active shooter incidents. These improvements included enhanced training for rapid response, coordinated communication among agencies, and the establishment of specialized units equipped and trained to handle mass casualty events. Regular drills and simulations became standard practice, aiming to prepare responders for the complexity and urgency of such situations. Schools across Finland were encouraged to develop emergency preparedness plans, including lockdown procedures, communication protocols, and coordination with local law enforcement. These measures sought to empower educational institutions to respond swiftly and effectively in crises, potentially reducing casualties and chaos. Legislatively, Finland introduced tighter regulations on firearm ownership, particularly for younger individuals. Psychological evaluations were made more comprehensive, involving multidisciplinary assessments and longer observation periods. Gun storage and safety measures were mandated more strictly, emphasizing responsibility and risk mitigation. The law enforcement response and subsequent policy changes highlighted the critical importance of preparedness, interagency cooperation, and proactive risk assessment. The Jokela tragedy served as a catalyst for systemic improvements not only in Finland but also informed international discussions on school safety and active shooter response. Despite these advancements, law enforcement agencies recognize that preventing such tragedies requires broader societal efforts. Early identification of at-risk individuals, mental health support, community engagement, and addressing the root causes of alienation and radicalization remain paramount. The Jokela school shooting remains a sobering lesson in the limits of preparedness and the urgent need for vigilance and compassion in protecting vulnerable populations. Through continuous learning and adaptation, Finland strives to honor the memory of those lost by building safer, more resilient communities. In the immediate aftermath of the Jokela school shooting, Finnish and international media outlets turned their full attention to the unfolding tragedy. News crews arrived quickly, broadcasting live updates as information emerged, while journalists worked tirelessly to piece together the story behind the shocking violence. The media's role was crucial, providing facts, context, and human stories that shaped public understanding and response. Finnish media outlets approached coverage with a deep sense of responsibility, mindful of the sensitive nature of the tragedy. Reporting emphasized respect for the victims and their families, avoiding sensationalism or gratuitous focus on the perpetrator. This approach aimed to balance the public's need for information with compassion and the prevention of glorifying the shooter, a concern prevalent in coverage of mass violence. Detailed reports examined Pekka-Eric Auvinen's background, his online activities, and the factors contributing to his radicalization. Interviews with survivors, family members, educators, and law enforcement officials offered multifaceted perspectives, humanizing those affected while exploring systemic issues. Editorials and opinion pieces delved into broader societal questions, including mental health services, bullying in schools, and firearm regulations. The tragedy sparked extensive public discourse across Finland. Citizens expressed shock and grief but also engaged in critical conversations about prevention and responsibility. Town hall meetings, community forums, and school assemblies became venues for dialogue, fostering collective reflection on social values and priorities. Many voiced calls for increased resources to support vulnerable youth and for reforms to prevent similar incidents. Social media platforms, though still nascent in 2007, played a growing role in shaping discourse. Online communities shared tributes, information, and calls for solidarity, while also wrestling with difficult questions about free speech, internet safety, and the influence of extremist content. The challenge of balancing openness with protection became a recurring theme in debates among policymakers, educators, and parents. The Jokela shooting's long-term societal impact extended beyond immediate policy changes. It altered Finland's national consciousness regarding school safety and youth well-being. Educational institutions adopted more comprehensive approaches to student mental health, bullying prevention, and crisis preparedness. Public awareness campaigns encouraged empathy, inclusion, and early intervention. Memorials and commemorations became important rituals, ensuring that victims' memories remained present in community life. Art installations, scholarships, and foundations in their names contributed to healing and served as reminders of the importance of vigilance and compassion. The tragedy also influenced Finnish culture, prompting literature, documentaries, and academic research exploring the roots and repercussions of youth violence. These works fostered deeper understanding and informed public debates on social cohesion, mental health, and the complex dynamics of alienation in modern society. Internationally, Jokela became part of a growing awareness of school shootings as a global phenomenon requiring cooperative responses. Finnish experts shared insights and lessons learned with counterparts worldwide, contributing to the development of best practices in prevention, emergency response, and post-trauma care. Despite progress, the event remains a somber reminder of vulnerabilities within societies and the ongoing need for comprehensive strategies addressing mental health, social inclusion, and responsible media coverage. Jokela's legacy continues to influence policies and practices aimed at nurturing safe, supportive environments where youth can thrive without fear or isolation.